It's the Eagle Community Television Forum with your host, Gary Shorman.
Welcome to the Forum. I'm Mike Kerner in for Gary Shorman this week, brought to you by Hayes Med and Eagle Communications. Our guest this week, a familiar face, Eber Phelps, our representative from the 111th District. Now, Eber, a lot of people know you. You were former mayor of Hayes a couple of times.
That's true, yes.
A couple of variations there, and city commission a few times, and you were a representative once before. But I want to go back. We'll get into politics here a little bit more in our second half of the show, but what I want to do is, first part of the show here, I want to ask you a little bit about your upbringing. You grew up in Hayes, and did you ever think when you were a young lad that you wanted to become a politician?
I don't know if it ever crossed my mind to get into politics per se, but growing up, my dad was the sheriff of Ellis County, so I'd been around, the election process a little bit. My mother was always a volunteer with the, working in one of the voting places here in Hayes, so there was a little bit of an involvement there. And then I think as I got a little bit older, I got involved in a few campaigns, handing out brochures and things like that. I believe what probably got me interested in it was the fact that a friend of mine that went to Fort Hayes, came out of Fort Hayes and went on to the city commission. And then a couple years later, another friend of mine graduated from Fort Hayes, and next thing you know, he's in the Kansas House of Representatives. So that got me thinking a little bit about it. And so I finally made the decision to run for the city commission a number of years back, probably in the late 80s, I believe it was.
Did that take a lot of research before you ran for office, of trying to think of all the things and the inner workings of the city, or did you just kind of jump in?
Oh, I think I probably did like most candidates. You started following the city government. I didn't make the decision to run, like a week before. I was thinking about it for probably, at least a year, I would say. And I started attending city commission meetings, following it a little bit closer. And I always said that when you're running for city government, you've got probably the 3 or 4 main issues, and then your first meeting reality sets in and you're voting on buying new tires or a new snowplow or something like that. In the meantime, all those hot button issues such as water, long-term water supplies and the budget and perhaps street maintenance or something like that kind of comes up, periodically, but you still have the day-to-day issues that come up, and that's a real reality check for anybody that gets into local government.
And then, of course, you ran for 111th District, and you won that a few years ago, and you were down there for quite a few years. And was Topeka a major difference in politics as opposed to maybe local politics?
I believe so. One thing, and I really brag about local government. I really love serving in city government. And one thing you have is, you'll have a five-man or woman commission, and they're really focused on doing what's best for the community, and a lot of the outside influence, the lobbying efforts and so forth aren't there, and also the partisan politics and that type of thing. And so everybody's really trying to represent the community. You might have a little bit different opinion on some of the issues, but for the most part, it's really good in that sense. Getting back into the legislature this time, I said, I really enjoyed being in city government because we did such innovative things like pass a balanced budget. We have a set of priorities, or at least street priority, which streets we're going to do. And so there was a lot better planning and so forth. And that's kind of been lacking, in my opinion, in the last few years here in the state level.
Well, I know that when you were in city commission many, many years ago, one of the big issues, and it's still around and it's now coming to light, is the getting the water from Edwards County. You were part of that in the original planning.
Absolutely, yeah. I was on the commission when we, had formed the water study panel, and when they came back to us, and that was their main recommendation. As commissioners, we all went down and looked at the ranch, to kind of get a visual. And then obviously we had quite a bit of open input meetings by the public, and we decided on that, voted on that, and it was a slow process. We had the citizens of Hayes voted in a 1-cent sales tax, which went for water expiration and all the legal things that go with that. And so it was kind of neat getting back on the commission here when the actual application was filed with the Kansas Water Office, to trigger the Water Transfer Act. I was really kind of hoping I'd be on the commission maybe when that came to fruition, but at the same time, the existing city commissioners, I think, really, embrace that whole process and the whole idea of the ranch. And I think they've been real good at being kind of a quick study and understanding exactly how that all works. So I think we're in good, well, I know we're in good hands as far as moving forward on that project. Of course, right now it's out of our hands in a sense that we have to wait for the decision from Topeka.
And they have to come back. And I don't know if Russell's still involved in all of that or not.
Oh, absolutely. And probably one of the things that's really made this more positive in the view of the folks in Topeka is the fact that it's now become somewhat of a regional water project. And so Russell remains a partner that has actually bought into it monetarily. But we've also, along the way, got letters of support from La Crosse, Ellis, obviously Russell, Victoria, and I think there's another community involved. But they're looking at that too, that could be a great source of long-term water supply for those communities to sustain their populations as well.
And what year do you think that was when you guys started that? And look where we're at now, how many years it took?
Well, for one thing, you got to save up a little bit of money. That sales tax, took a while. I think we've got probably over $20 million now. But it just took a long time to go through that process in Topeka. It's new. We're the first community ever to file an application to trigger the Water Transfer Act. So the folks in Topeka, meaning the Kansas Water Office, Department of Agriculture, and everybody, they want to make sure that they're doing this right. And so I guess on this end, patience has been the key.
Yeah, you're groundbreakers in more than one way.
Absolutely.
And then there's
we are too. Also, when you look at our water conservation program here in Hays, I've suggested that we actually there's a mayor's competition going on right now nationwide where mayors submit things that their communities have done as far as water conservation. And I think when you look at our per capita water usage and where we are as a community, I think we're definitely up there in the forefront of communities that have done everything possible to implement water conservation programs.
Well, I kind of strayed from my topic a little bit. My topic, originally was how did you get interested in politics and all that stuff. And then, I'll go back real quick before we take a break. What made you decide to go and run for state legislator in Topeka?
Well, back then, I was serving in city government, and the legislator at that time was Delbert Gross, who had indicated to me and several others, that he was not going to seek re-election. And so I kind of just took that in stride, but there was, it's kind of like anybody deciding to run for any office, you start getting, encouragement from those around you. And so I, had people suggest that I look into it. And I did, and obviously somewhere along the line I made the commitment to actually pursue it.
Well, I think in the next part of the show, second half of the show, I want to talk a little bit about politics, but I'm going to try to stay away from the partisan politics. I want to kind of get into what's happening every day, day-to-day operating in Topeka. What happens down there, and how does that whole thing operate? And we'll talk about that in the second half of the show. Okay. Our guest is Eber Phelps, representative from the 111th District. This is The Forum. I'm Mike Kerner in for Gary Sharman. The show today brought to you by Hays Med and by Eagle Communications.
Hays Med is your first and best choice for healthcare. They're the only facility providing tertiary level services in this region. With more than 70 physicians and 26 specialties ranging from heart, orthopedic, spine care, cancer, obstetrics and gynecology, wound care, rehabilitation and surgery, including the Da Vinci robotic surgery, Hays Med is your comprehensive health provider for people throughout Western Kansas. Hays Med, helping people be healthy.
Are you frustrated with Wi-Fi dead zones in your home? It happens when you don't have Pulse, the cutting-edge Wi-Fi solution from Eagle Communications. A Pulse-certified Eagle technician maps your home, then installs a dual-band modem and router, plus discrete access points to deliver wall-to-wall Wi-Fi with no dead zones. Pulse powers all your family's devices in all the places you love to live. Get Pulse. Wi-Fi made simple. Only from Eagle Communications. Call today.
Welcome back to The Forum. I'm Mike Kerner in for Gary Sharman. By the way, if you've got some show ideas, Gary would love to hear from you. You can give him some great advice on that. It's gary.shorman@eaglecom.net. Again, gary.shorman@eaglecom.net. Again, I'm Mike Kerner. Our guest today, Eber Phelps from the 111th District. We talked about his history a little bit in the first part of the show, found out what made you interested in politics, and now, after leaving the City Commission and leaving as mayor, you are now back to the 111th district in Topeka. Down there, from what I've heard in Topeka, that this year it's not so much bickering as there have been in years past.
I think you've hit it on the nose there, because the 4 years that I was gone, apparently there was just a really tense atmosphere, I guess you could say, between lobbyists and legislators, between the House and the Senate, between the House and the governor and so forth, and especially with the House leadership. One thing that I've noticed, and people remarked about this right at the very beginning of the session, that they go, oh my gosh, people are actually talking to each other. And I believe you have a Speaker of the House, probably has not voted the same way I have, but he's at least let the discussions take place. And subsequently, I believe there's more of a collaborative spirit. I noticed that right off the bat. And it's persisted, you know, with the fact that when you look at, say, before the end of January, we voted, both the House and the Senate voted on a tax bill, which was a real tough vote for a lot of folks, you know, new legislators coming in, and their first major vote is on a tax bill. And what stands out there is the fact that in the House we, you know, had 83 votes for a tax bill, and the Senate had 20-some votes, you know, enough to pass. And that told me that those folks, when they were out there campaigning, said, I want to go down there and try to help, you know, fix this budget situation, this budget crisis that we're having. And so when you see, you know, a real bipartisan effort like that, that was a real positive thing. But I will also go on to say that in the committees, I'm seeing the same thing, really good open discussions. I'm on, besides the Appropriations Committee, I'm also on local government, and then on the higher education budget. And great discussions, great testimony. We heard from all our college presidents here in the state of Kansas as far as the regents. And just everybody seems to be focused. And I'm hoping that the 2 vetoes that the governor put out there on the tax bill and the Medicaid expansion hasn't dampened that, you know, that cooperative effort that we've seen thus far.
Now, you only have so many days you're open for session, basically. I say open for session, but there's only so many days. But there have been years past where it's extended past that because you've had things to deal with school issues and all of that. What do you think this year? Do you think you'll be out in time?
Well, one thing, it's a good point that you bring up there. You know, we usually operate in a 90-day session, and the way they did it in the old days, I guess you could say, I'm one of the old guys now, is the fact that you would probably go through your regular part of the session, then you go on first adjournment, and we came back for what they call the wrap-up session. They usually have about 4 or 5 days devoted to that, and then sometimes you would go over, and a few years ago they went over it like by 21 days, I believe. But what I noticed this year when the schedule first came out, the House schedule, I guess you could say, or the session calendar, you had you know, X number of days for the first part of the session, but I couldn't help but notice on the wrap-up session, or what we used to call the veto session, they literally had 2 weeks. And so I thought, well, they must know something I don't know. Now, obviously with these 2 vetoes, because coming in the session, we really needed to deal with the budget, both the 2017 budget and then the 2018 and 2019 budgets. We had to come up with a school finance formula to try to satisfy the Supreme Court, and we had to look at Medicaid expansion and you know, just a host of things. But the fact of the matter is, we got that tax bill done right away, and then shortly thereafter, the Medicaid expansion bill, both vetoed. So I looked at that from the standpoint that could really extend the session, and I also looked, well, maybe it's good that we have those 2 weeks.
Next, kind of want to lead you down the other pattern, the inner workings there of Topeka, and you talked about legislators, you talked about lobbyists. How does a legislator deal with a lobbyist? Do lobbyists come to you during certain times of the day? Do you make appointments with them? Do you see them after hours? How do lobbyists work into sitting down with you, or do they sit down with a whole committee? Do they sit with a group of you and talk to you about what their concerns are and what they want to push through?
Well, the short answer would be yes. I mean, it's a combination of things. I will point this out that you know, the whole term lobbyist kind of has a negative connotation when we look at Washington, D.C. I've always said in Topeka, lobbyists, because it's smaller, in scale, they're more of a resource. And most lobbyists that have been there a long time, the seasoned lobbyists, I think are good for their word, and they're not going to lead you astray, and they oftentimes can give you both sides of the argument. And subsequently, those that kind of carry that, I guess that professionalism, have been around a long time. There's some lobbyists that were there many years before I got there the first time, and they're still there. And I believe that they know that if they start kind of, trying to work both sides in a sense, they can see their career down there very much shortened, and some people have kind of left by the wayside. So as far as the lobbyists, a lot of them, I think they have the skill set of really learning what committees everybody's on and when you're going to be in your office and when you're not. Most of them give you the courtesy of actually setting up an appointment, but there's evening situations where maybe the Kansas Automobile Dealers Association has a reception, and they can kind of talk about some of the things that are important to that industry. Or you might have the Kansas Contractors Association talking about, our comprehensive transportation program.
And when they do that, do they sit legislators down like maybe 20, 30 at a time, or individual, or
I've seen it, one-on-one, little group things, or the whole crowd comes in. Mind you, a lot of the lobbyists also have to come in and testify in a committee. So, if they're a proponent or an opponent of an issue, they'll come in there, and they, in turn will come and express that view to those that aren't on the committee. Like I'm on the, say the higher education budget committee, but I'm not, say, on tax committee or on transportation. So you got to rely on those members of those committees. You got to rely on the lobbyists for that, the advocates, and they kind of come in and keep you up to speed. So it's a pretty full day, either listening, reading, or sitting around patiently, in a committee setting and hearing testimony.
I would think, listening would be the big thing, because I'm sure there's a lot of people that come down there and you're sitting there and they want to tell about maybe an issue that they're concerned with. And do you look up sometimes and go, oh, that's a local person, and you know them and you didn't even realize it? Or do you know ahead of time typically?
Oh, typically, we've got, at the beginning of the session.
And by the way, there's a lot of regulars too. You get come through.
But the folks from AARP were there, and we had a couple folks from Hayes were there for about 4 days. They kind of got to be real regulars, but very passionate about their issue. And we often have folks from Developmental Services Northwest Kansas, come down, and Walt Hill from the Community Mental Health Centers, High Plains Mental Health, they're regulars, coming down and following the whole budget process. And of course, with all the cuts that have been taking place the last few years and the whole budget crisis, I think they're making their presence. You want to keep reminding you of, how delicate the situation is, say in Northwest Kansas with community mental health centers. So it's all part of that learning process and on issues. And I dare say that if there's a legislator who doesn't want to hear that, they're going to be struggling a little bit, because not only do you hear about a particular industry or a particular issue, but if the folks are from your community, you kind of get a feel for where things are at in Hays, Kansas, or in Northwest Kansas.
So what do you think we're about out of time, but maybe wrap it up here with this. What is the biggest topic this year in Topeka? What's the hardest thing you as a legislator have to overcome and deal this year with?
Well, going into the session, if you were to ask me what the top 3 issues were, I would have said the budget, the budget, the budget. Mm-hmm. Because it, truly, we have to have a balanced budget. We had to shore things up for the 2017 budget so that we can get to the end of the fiscal year, which ends on June 30th. We also had to prepare the budgets for 2018 and 19, and everything is dependent on the budget. Your K-12 funding depends on the budget, and as some of the issues I just mentioned, such as those issues that affect our elderly population and our the community mental health centers, those are all based on what comes out of that budget. And that's why it's going to be some really heavy lifting to be done when we get back for this wrap-up session, because we didn't get that done in the first part.
Well, I hope you do some heavy lifting for our area. Can you do that?
Absolutely.
That's what you're there for, right? 111th District Representative, it's Eber Phelps. Want to thank him for being our guest today. It is The Forum. I'm Mike Kerner, in for Gary Shorman this week. The Forum brought to you by HaysMed and Eagle Communications. Thanks and have a great day.
My name is Jeremy Burkholder and I manage the Network Operations Center at Eagle Communications. My job at the Network Operations Center is ensuring that we've got the right members of the Eagle team involved in supporting our customers, resolving their issues, and making sure we meet their needs long term. Service to me is understanding my customers' needs and ensuring that we're meeting them, as well as ensuring they have a reliable product on a day-to-day basis. The favorite part of my job is when I get the opportunity to work with the great team we have at Eagle to exceed the customer's expectations and showing them what an employee-owned company can do.